A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay. A new episode every single day. Episode 18, Pyre and the Immolation, Part 1. The sun bled its dark terminal crimson behind the jagged peaks of the Pyrean mountains, leaving the necropolis of Aegae to be consumed by the sickly, flickering orange of the rising pyres. The air, thick with the cloying scent of pine resin and ozone, had turned brittle. The pyre had not yet been touched by the torch, but the valley was already suffocating under the weight of an invisible fire. High on the northern ridge, veiled by the encroaching shadows of the pines, Bartolus observed the valley with the cold, unblinking patience of an alpine wolf. He raised a single, scarred hand, and the relentless, whistling rain of Illyrian arrows abruptly ceased. He had shifted his forces from harassment to containment. "Why do we stop, my king?" murmured Grabus, his lieutenant, the man's bowstrings still taut, itching to loose a volley into the disorganized mass below. "The regent's perimeter is fraying. A mass strike now would break them before the rites even begin." "Lower your bow," Bartolus commanded, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that brokered no argument. "We are no longer hunting, Grabus. We are building a fence. Have the men knock their arrows and aim directly at the center of the camp, at the pyre, at the sarcophagus, at the royal tents. If any armed party attempts to flee the valley, shoot them down. Otherwise, you do not release a single shaft. Let them stay in their cage," Bartolus thought, his eyes sweeping over the sprawling necropolis. He watched the frantic posturing of Ptolemy's mercenaries, the slow, grinding geometry of Parmenian's phalanx, and the feverish, conspiratorial shadows cast by young Attalus' movement through the tents. "They have turned their sacred burial ground into a killing jar, and I am merely placing the lid on top. They are going to tear each other to pieces over that unlit pyre," Grabus noted, a cruel smile touching his lips as he signaled the archers to adjust their aim. "Exactly," Bartolus replied, his expression an unreadable mask of weathered leather and old war scars. "The Argead house is a nest of vipers, and they have finally run out of prey. They will devour one another. There is no glory in slaughtering a diseased animal," the Illyrian warlord mused, leaning his heavy forearms against a rocky outcropping. "If I strike now, they will unite against the common foe. If I wait, they will do my work for me." He traced the line of his own jaw, coldly calculating the geometry of the coming day. "If the survivor of this funeral has teeth, if he proves he is truly made of iron, perhaps I will negotiate a border treaty. But if he is weak, I will sweep down from this ridge and wipe this pathetic dynasty from the map before the sun sets on their blood-soaked arena." "Keep them contained," Bartolus reiterated, his gaze locked on the valley floor. The massive, unlit timber grid stood silent in the center of the camp, a dark monument waiting for the spark. "We do not light the fire. We simply wait to see who is left standing when they finally choose to set themselves ablaze." While the Macedonian camps were plagued by the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting supply mules, and the frantic, disorganized jitters of men who knew their leadership was collapsing, Ismenias and his vanguard existed in a state of clinical, terrifying stillness. They were not merely a blockade. They were a living, breathing accusation of Macedonian incompetence. "Do they ever sleep, Commander?" a young Macedonian picket whispered to his comrade, gesturing toward the bronze-clad stillness of the Theban perimeter. "Don't look at them," his comrade hissed, clutching his spear with white knuckles. "They aren't men. They're statues that happen to breathe." Ismenias, standing at the edge of the square, overheard the tremor in the boy's voice. "Let them tremble," he thought, his own expression as impassive as the bronze shields behind him. Fear is the only language this rabble understands. They operated on a rigid, four-watch rotation that never faltered, regardless of the creeping cold or the suffocating blanket of barbarian soot. They did not sprawl across the ground like the exhausted Macedonian levies. They lived and rested within a fortified harbor formation. Their phalanx squares were tightly constructed, with shields locked into an impregnable, overlapping skin of bronze. Within these human-made geometries, the men cycled through their rest in absolute, efficient silence. There were no campfires, no drunken boasts, only the sound of synchronized breathing and the soft, rhythmic clink of mail. By maintaining this discipline in the face of the valley's decay, they projected an aura of chilling superiority, effectively owning the highway and turning the road into a sovereign monument to Theban power. Every few hours, as the watch changed, the vanguard performed their ritual of intimidation. Without a word of command, 300 spears would snap forward in unison, a sound like a single, massive intake of breath. Then, the rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of Sariss's striking shields would echo across the valley, a metronomic display of weapon work designed to remind every Macedonian who looked toward the road that they were currently living under foreign occupation. Ismenias watched his men with the pride of a master craftsman inspecting a flawless blade. "Look at them," he mused, noting the way the Macedonian perimeter guards instinctively recoiled from the Theban line. "They think we are waiting for the games to begin. They don't realize we are already practicing the choreography of their subjugation." He turned his gaze toward the royal encampment. The Theban grip was not just on the road, it was in the air they breathed. By refusing to show fatigue, by turning the very act of resting into a disciplined drill, he was stripping away the last illusion of Macedonian autonomy. When the funeral riot begins, Ismenias thought, his hand resting casually on his belt, we will not need to charge. We will simply continue our rotation, stepping over the corpses of this collapsing dynasty, as if they were nothing more than debris on the road. For the Theban vanguard, the valley was no longer a necropolis. It was a parade ground for the hegemony that would inherit the earth. When the funeral procession of the late king, Alexander II, finally reached the resting place of the grandfathers, they were met by a monolithic structure, a massive wooden fortress that served as a cremation pyre. Standing 20 feet high, giant trunks of resin-rich pine, cedar, and meticulously dried oak had been stacked to form a rigid geometric grid. From the vertical fissures of the timber framework drifted the chill clay of the awaiting burial pit, mingled with the terrifyingly sweet aroma of the embalming oils wrapped around the dead. The empty, visceral chanting of the priests, who had rent their garments, echoed as Alexander's corpse was hoisted to the summit of the timber pyre. He was encased in the exquisite bronze breastplate he had worn upon the battlefield in life, yet what cruelly tormented Philip's heart was not the luster of that armor, but his brother's face. To conceal the agony of the regicide's ghastly, unexpected ambush, the cowardly stab wound that had pierced his spine from behind, a thin gold leaf death mask, hammered to its absolute limit, had been pressed askew over his brother's chilled features. It was as though the mask were forcibly suffocating the final, distorted shriek of the young king, whose defenseless back had been so ruthlessly taken. "He looks like a temple sculpture," Perdiccas whispered. His hands clamped like iron around a silver urn filled with sacred unguents, pressing so hard the metal groaned. His teeth chattered as he spoke, his voice vibrating with the fragile, brittle frequency of a boy on the verge of internal collapse. He does not look like our brother anymore. He is too white. He is no longer your brother," Eurydice's voice cut through from behind them, a low register of infinite sorrow, and beneath it a cold cadence of tempered steel. Her hands clamped onto the new king's narrow shoulders like a vice, physically stabilizing his trembling frame. At this exact micro-negative second, he has crossed the threshold of mortals to become an ancestral deity, a Temenus to watch over us. Do not flinch, Perdiccas. Do not let him depart into the absolute dark while starved of his due honors. Execute your royal duty. Philip stood beside them, his jaw locked into an immovable ridge. He stared at Alexander's pristine, oiled corpse, his slate-gray eyes tracing the lines of his brother's chest. They did not just kill a man, Philip thought, his mind operating with a terrifying, detached clarity. They killed the illusion of our safety. He didn't see a god, he saw a warning. If he showed a single tear, if he let his hand shake as his brother's was shaking, he would be providing Ptolemy with the exact coordinates of his fear. One by one, the Macedonian barons stepped forward into the tightening circle of the altar, their boots grinding against the dry stones. The princess, Eurino, wept openly, her shoulders heaving beneath her black lace as she smashed a honey jar inlaid with mathematical patterns of ivory against the foundation stones, the sweet stickiness coating the dirt. The veteran General Parmenion laid a scarred pike that had gorged on blood across the base of the timber, offering a rigid, statuesque military salute. Old Italus stepped forward, the gold leaf hilt of his broadsword catching the sharp and forgiving sun with a deliberate ritualistic motion. He cast a handful of premium frankincense, procured from the costly eastern trade routes, into the smoldering gaps of the timber pyre. The scent of the resin hit the air, sweet and cloying, a stark contrast to the surrounding decay. The area around the sarcophagus had long ago ceased to be a mourning ground. It was now a tomb of living iron. Attalus and his veterans were no longer mere soldiers. They were the ghosts of the old order, tethered to the dead king, by a pact that transcended the simple need for sleep or sustenance. They had not rotated their shifts, nor had they tasted hot food in 72 hours. Their armor was a landscape of crusted salt and dried grime, and their eyes were fixed in unblinking, predatory slits that refused to acknowledge the living. "Step back, Regent," Attalus rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. He did not move as Ptolemy approached, his heavy xiphus held with the casual, terrifying ease of a man who had already decided to die. Ptolemy hesitated, his own frame shuddering, his hand hovering near the gold-leaf death mask of the king. "This is the state's business, Attalus. I am the regent. I have the right to inspect the rites before the pyre is lit." "You have the right to walk away," Attalus countered, his men forming a seamless, impenetrable wall of overlapping bronze shields behind him. Not a single sarissa dipped, not a single soldier breathed heavily. It was a static, overwhelming assertion of dominance. "The king is under our watch. We are the only ones who remember what it means to serve an Argead, rather than a ledger thief." Look at him, Attalus thought, his gaze sweeping over the trembling, wine-soaked wreck of the regent. He's a man trying to claim a throne, but he has the spirit of a kennel cur. He fears the pyre because he fears the judgment of the fire. "The funeral games will begin with the sun," one of Attalus's men hissed from the rank, his voice a low, gravelly promise. "And when the first blood hits the sand, you will see how much your mercenaries love your coin when they face the true steel of the guard." Attalus felt the tension ripple through his unit, a silent electric surge of intent. He glanced at the sarcophagus, then back to the horizon, where the first gray light of the third day was beginning to stain the sky. Let him try to force the issue, he thought, his grip tightening on his blade. Every second he spends staring at this wall is a second he isn't managing his own collapse. When the games devolve, when the riot begins, we will not be guarding the king anymore. We will be the ones who shatter the cage. The veterans stood motionless, their silence more deafening than a war cry. They were waiting for the signal, the moment the ceremonial piece of the ephora shattered. They were not there to prevent the chaos, they were there to ignite it. And when the first blade was drawn, Ptolemy would find that the ghosts he had tried to ignore were the only things left in the valley, with the strength to kill him. Parmenion did not believe in political gambits, he believed in geometry. While the regent paced in a fugue of obsession and the queen mother played the architect of distraction, Parmenion simply tightened the knot. The phalanx, previously deployed in a loose, watchful crescent, began a slow, grinding contraction. It was not a maneuver for battle, it was a maneuver for space. "Tighten the interval," Parmenion commanded, his voice barely rising above the rhythmic crunch of gravel under 3,000 pairs of greaves. "I want the shields locked. No gaps for the wind, and certainly no room for the mercenaries." Philotas, his lieutenant, watched the maneuver with a grim realization. "We're pushing them, General. The mercenaries are already murmuring. Ptolemy's guard thinks we're closing in on the pyre to secure it, but we're forcing them right out of the central square." Parmenion did not look at the mercenaries, he looked at the ground they stood upon. Let them murmur, he thought, the steel of his own armor cold and unyielding. Space is the only true currency in a coup. If Ptolemy wants to command this valley, he needs to stand on it. If I take the ground, he has nothing to command but the air. As the phalanx blocks compressed into a solid, impenetrable mass, they effectively squeezed the regent's foreign guards away from the great tumulus. It was a tactical encroachment that bordered on open hostility, yet it was executed with the dull, methodical pace of a wall being built. There was no charge, no shout, only the relentless, clanking advance of bronze. "General," Philotas pressed, keeping his voice low, "if we push them any further, we'll be within spear length of the queen's carriage. If Ptolemy orders a strike, we'll have to respond." Parmenion finally turned his gaze toward the center of the camp, where the royal family stood framed by the smoke of the pyres. He saw the tension in Philip's posture, the calculated distance of the Thebans, and the fraying nerves of the regent. The pivot is the hardest part of the dance, Parmenion mused, his mind stripping away the veneer of loyalty to reveal the stark mathematical reality of power. Ptolemy holds the title, but I hold the mass. He is a man who thinks he is the sun, and the rest of us are orbiting him. He hasn't realized that the moment I turn my shields away, his entire orbit will collapse. We are not here to strike Philetus, Parmenion said, his eyes hard and unblinking. We are here to be the wall. When the riot begins and the air is thick with iron and bad intentions, the men in the center will look for a place to stand. Whoever I choose to protect will be the one who leaves this valley with a kingdom. He watched the mercenaries retreat, their faces masks of confusion and growing panic as they were pushed toward the periphery. Parmenion leaned on his pike, his silhouette standing firm against the rising sun. The games are for the boys and the bloodthirsty, he thought. But the victory is for the man who controls the distance between the blades. The phalanx settled into a block of absolute crushing weight. Parmenion had made his choice of terrain. He was the pivot now, and the entire fate of the Argead line was pinned between his shields and the coming storm. By dawn, the work was complete. Antipater stood at the threshold of the final supply wagon, his fingers tracing the edge of a heavy, wax-sealed scroll. Inside, the coffers of the Argead dynasty, centuries of tribute, the spoils of conquest, and the very coin destined to pay the mercenary blades were being hauled toward the southern passes, buried beneath mundane crates of funereal linen and ritual incense. He turned back to the merchant's tent, where the air was thick with the scent of stale wine and the palpable sweat of panicked financiers. The ledgers Lord Melas Antipater requested, his voice a low, steady hum that cut through the frantic murmurs of the room. The merchant, a man whose skin had gone the color of parchment, slid the final document across the scarred table. It's done, General. Every title, every land grant, every grain shipment, it's all in your name and your associates. The regent thinks he commands an army. In truth, he commands a ghost. Antipater didn't smile. He merely folded the document ends, slid it into his heavy mantle. A king who cannot feed his soldiers is merely a man in a costume, he thought, his mind already calculating the logistics of the flight. Let Ptolemy play at being a ruler. Let him strut and command the games. He's currently presiding over a bankruptcy he doesn't even know exists. And the men? Antipater asked, his eyes narrowing. Are the transport drivers prepared? They are already on the road, disguised as funeral attendants, the merchant stammered. By midday, the treasury will be 2 leagues beyond the ridge. Antipater nodded, satisfied. He walked to the tent flap and peered out. The first golden rays of the third day were cresting the Pyrean peaks, catching the bronze of the phalanxes and the flickering orange of the pyres. He could hear the low, ominous rumble of the men gathering for the games, the sound of a storm gathering its strength. The games will be a bloodbath, Antipater mused, his gaze cold and detached. The regent will be looking for glory, the mountain barons will be looking for a crown, and the soldiers will be looking for someone to blame when they realize their pockets are empty. And I will be watching from the periphery. You've done well, Melas, Antipater said, turning to leave. When the chaos starts, stay in this tent. Do not show your face, do not look for the regent. The kingdom is a hollow shell now. Whoever wins this day will inherit nothing but a starving, broken void. He stepped out into the crisp, biting morning air, his hand resting briefly on the hilt of his dagger. He was no longer a servant of the crown, nor a partner to the regency. He was a man who had successfully liquidated a legacy. The moment the first blade is drawn, he thought, scanning the perimeter for his hidden horses, I will simply cease to be a part of this landscape. Let them fight over the ash. I'm taking the fire with me. Antipater stepped into the space Attalus had vacated near the pyre. The old general's presence was heavy, a suffocating counterweight to the surrounding tension. Antipater did not look at the treasury tents, he knew they were already hollow. He looked directly at the young King Perdiccas, and then his hard, granite-carved features turned slowly toward Philip. Antipater reached into his heavy gray mantle and withdrew a small, unpolished bronze coin, an ancient token of hospitality, from the era of Alexander II. He dropped it onto the timber beside the corpse with a heavy, final clink. The foundation is rotting, Antipater thought, his chest tightening with a profound diagnostic dread for Macedonia. He had seen 3 kings pass into this dirt, but never had the kingdom felt so hollowed out from within, so exposed to the barbarian hordes beyond the peaks. While the rest of the court maneuvered for the spoils of a dead king, Antipater recognized the look in the youngest boy's eyes. It was the look of a wolf cub realizing the pack was leaderless and beginning to count the teeth of his rivals. He saw the way Philip traced the lines of his brother's armor, his eyes devoid of the tremors that plagued the other royals. The boy was not mourning, he was measuring. "Step back, King Pardicus," Antipater commanded softly, his gravelly voice pulling the boy out of his trance. He cast a final, lingering look at the pyre, at the gold, the incense, and the body of a king who had effectively been sold out from under his own funeral. "Everything here is currency," Antipater mused, his hand resting on the hidden ledger inside his cloak. "And today I am the only one who knows the price." The pre-dawn light was not the soft gold of a new beginning, but a harsh clinical gray that exposed the fissures in the Macedonian encampment. Young Attalus moved through the peripheral tents like a fever, his presence a jagged pulse of adrenaline in the stagnant morning air. He found them huddled in their gear, the hot-blooded scions of Pydna and Elymia, nursing their grievances and the lingering heat of the wine they had scavenged. He didn't need to shout. He leaned close, his voice a rasping, conspiratorial cadence that fed their growing disgust with the regency. "You think they are holding a funeral?" Attalus hissed, his eyes glittering with a predatory, feverish intensity. He reached into his belt and produced a small, serrated whetstone, pressing it into the hand of a noble heir. "They are holding a slaughterhouse. They are cleaning the blood off the throne so they can auction it to the highest Theban bidder. Do you truly intend to watch from the sidelines while they sell the soul of our house?" The noble, a youth with more pride than sense, looked at the whetstone and then at his own blade. "Ptolemy has the veterans, Attalus. He has the perimeter. Ptolemy has a ledger and a coward's heart," Attalus countered, his tone dripping with disdain. "They are sheep waiting for the shearer," he thought, scanning the tent for the flicker of rebellion in their eyes. "I need only a spark, a single, bloody moment of defiance, and they will tear this entire necropolis apart." He moved from tent to tent, his message a singular, corrosive refrain. The funeral games were not meant to be a spectacle. They were a test. When the sand is raked and the herald calls for the combatants, Attalus whispered to a group of brawling officers, "Do not throw a javelin to win a laurel. Throw it to end a regency. If you want a king, stop waiting for one to be crowned by a whisper in a dark room. Force the truth out of them. A true Argead is proven by the steel he carries and the blood he is willing to spill to hold his ground." He watched as they began to sharpen their blades, the collective rasp of iron against stone, sounding like the hiss of a rising tide. "They are ready," he mused, his own grip tightening on his broadsword. "They feel the hunger now. They don't want a funeral, they want a purge." His singular goal was to ensure that when the funeral games commenced under the morning sun, the arena would not be a place of athletic display, but a killing floor. He had spent the night weaving a pact of violence, identifying the men who had lost their fear of the regent and found a new, sharp hunger for change. The sun rose over Aegae, not with the majesty of a new reign, but with the flat, pitiless glare of a butcher's shop. Eurydice emerged from the royal tent draped in black, her silhouette framed by the looming, unlit grid of the pyre. To the watching eyes of the Macedonian camp, cynical mercenaries, nervous barons, and Ptolemy's own jittery spies, she was the portrait of a shattered mother, a queen whose world had been incinerated in the span of 3 days. But behind the veil, her mind was a cold, perfectly ordered library. She moved through the lines of the infantry, pausing to place a steadying hand on the shoulder of a young, terrified shield-bearer. Her touch was warm, her expression one of weary, maternal grace. "Hold your head high, soldier," she whispered, her voice carrying just enough tremolo to mimic the grief of a woman who had lost everything. "The king would want his men to stand as straight as the mountain peaks. Do not let the Illyrians think we are broken." The soldier straightened, visibly emboldened by the queen mother's touch. "I will not fail him, Majesty," he promised, his voice cracking. "You will fail him," Eurydice thought, her internal pulse remaining a flat, unwavering line. "You will fail because you are defending a corpse, while the living are already miles beyond the ridge." She passed Ptolemy near the perimeter of the games. He looked like a man drowning in dry air, his hands fluttering at the edges of his tunic. She approached him, leaning in close so that the nearby officers could see the intimacy of their alliance, a calculated performance of shared mourning. "The logs are set, Regent," she murmured, her eyes dark and unreadable. "The people are watching. They need to see you lead. If you look as though you are trembling, they will wonder if the fire is cursed. Be the titan they expect, or they will bury us all beneath the pyre. Ptolemy blinked, sweat beading on his upper lip. The games? I must ensure the games are. The games are a trifle, she interrupted, her voice a razor wire of command masked by a sigh. Focus on the image of strength. Philip and Perdiccas will remain by the sarcophagus until the final rite. They are the symbols of your continuity. Keep them close, Ptolemy. Let the army see the stability you have bought for them. Let him keep them close, she mused as she walked away, her back rigid. Let him think he is holding them in his palm. By the time the final torch hits the timber and the crowd turns to scream for blood, he will be staring at an empty space. Eurydice stood as the axis upon which their world turned. Her gaze swept over her surviving children, their silhouettes framed by the pre-dawn gloom. This was the final farewell to her firstborn, but the mother in her had been cauterized into a weapon. Her heart hammered a funeral march against her ribs, but she smothered the emotion, keeping her breathing shallow and cold. I still have 3, she whispered to the hungry void. I will not watch them burn. She looked at her children and made a silent covenant. She would guide them through this, survive the regent, and then she would be the one to light the match under Ptolemy's feet. She would reduce his life to the same ash that would soon drift on the wind. She reached the edge of the assembly, her gaze sweeping over the valley. She knew the location of Dirtis' scouts on the northern rim. She knew the heartbeat of every Theban guard Ismenias had positioned. Her grief had been hollowed out, replaced by a terrifying singular focus. She was no longer mourning, she was an architect. She looked toward Philip, who stood near the pyre, his expression a perfect, hollow imitation of sorrow. He caught her eye for the briefest fraction of a second. There was no flicker of warmth, only the cold, mechanical recognition of a job already in motion. The distraction is set, she thought. The riot will start in the arena, the regent will turn his eyes toward the blood, and when the smoke obscures the horizon, my sons will vanish into the Theban mist. Ptolemy wants to be the master of a funeral pyre? Let him have it. He can rule the ash, while I carry the fire elsewhere. I can walk this through, she thought, the resolution settling in her blood like iron. We will survive the fire, and then we will become it. To be continued in episode 18, Pyre and the Immolation Part 2. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below. In the ancient world, history is forged by both raw violence and cold ambition. Which force truly drives the rise of an empire? The blade that cuts down a king, or the brilliant mind that designs the strategy?